So, and now on to our speakers. We brought two experts, as I said, in the field. We have Susan Phinney Silver from the Packard Foundation and Caryn Sachs from the Erich and Hannah Sachs Family Foundation. Susan is in charge of a portfolio of PRIs there are about 160 million in that portfolio. And Caryn is responsible as president for, 19 active PRIs in her family's foundation. And so both of them have a lot of experience with this and are looking forward to all your questions. So if I could, before we start, just take a quick poll around the room of what areas of interest you might have that we might be able to speak and bring some examples. So if we could start over here and just kind of go around. Do you have an area of interest, whether it's education, international?
Education.
Great.
Education and health.
Great.
Education.
Education and community service.
Kathy?
International.
Great.
With the Packard team, so international or conservation is what we can chime in on. So.
Great. In the back?
Education, community development, and environment.
All right.
Education and international.
Great. Nancy?
Education and international.
All of it.
All right. All right. Come on. Come on in.
Health and community development.
Health and community? Health and the
Nothing
open.
in particular. Okay.
All right. In the back?
All of the above and also the arts.
Arts. Okay.
Everything.
Okay. Larissa?
Community development and environmental sustainability.
Great.
Education and community development.
Okay.
International education.
Great.
International microfinancing and education on the field.
All right.
Everything.
Everything. Exciting. Well, I'm going to turn it over then, and we'll have Susan speak for a little bit, and then Caryn, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So please have your questions ready. We're looking forward to getting a lot out of this. Thank you very much. So please welcome Caryn and Susan.
Thank you, Jason. So we're happy to be here today. I think Caryn and I represent sort of two ends of a spectrum of foundations. Obviously, the Packard Foundation being a fairly well-established foundation. But I'm really happy to be here today because I think what I really want to emphasize is that we all started somewhere. So even at the Packard Foundation, we started with one little $6,000 PRI. One of our board members was hooked up with the Yosemite Valley Natural History Association and was very excited about a book on Sierra Nevada birds. And so, and thought that a loan would be a good way to get this done. So that's, that was in 1980. But so our program really started with that individual opportunity that came up through a board member. We didn't have a program, we didn't have staff, but we just sort of got it done. And then over the years, in the 80s, we were sort of hit and miss one-off transactions, so which it sounds like some of you are in that stage. So I just want to put out there that we all sort of have been at that stage at one point. And so over the years, we did individual transactions, and it really wasn't until probably the 1990s that that acorn grew into. We started to do more systematically PRIs. We started to grow a portfolio. The board and staff started to realize that maybe we needed some policies. There was enough critical mass. It was over 100 million in portfolio. Started to sort of think about it as a program. And so at this point, we have we're about at 135 million and 50 transactions outstanding. Over our history, we've done like 200 PRIs and 450 million. So it has grown, but it did start with that acorn of just individual PRIs. So our foundation, our board has been very, as the program has grown, our board has been very supportive of PRIs as a tool. I mean, as Jason alluded to, it enables us to make larger dollar amounts available than we could through our grants alone. It enables us to recycle, to take advantage of time-sensitive opportunities, and to help some of our nonprofit grantees take on larger projects than they would be able to otherwise. And I can talk about a few examples of that. One thing in talking about, I think it's a good thing to distinguish is how our program is structured. Our board decided early on that our program would be a carve-out from the endowment. So, there's a lot of different ways that foundations do it, either taking it out of grant budgets, which has its own implications then in terms of how attractive that is. to make those dollars available. I know in the past, in the early years of our program, we took losses out of our grant budget. At this point, the decision was made. It's separate. It's a separate pool of money. It's carved out in the endowment. Really, we're really trying to actively promote this as a tool. So that led to that structure. We also do have the ability to do both PRIs and MRIs. Out of our, we have $180 million. I think $180 million carve out. Essentially, it used to be 3% of our endowment. As the endowment hit some volatility in 2008, the board came back and really wanted to create stability for the program. So at the moment, it's a fixed $180 million for the program.
Does everybody understand the difference between an MRI and a PRI? We need to have a quick,
So an MRI, I think, is a growing field. Mission-related investment is what it stands for. Sometimes called impact investments. And essentially, it can mean different things, but basically usually means something that has more of a profit motive to it. And so mission investing can include PRIs, MRIs, and other tools. And you get into some, for example, we've done equity PRIs, and so there are a lot of blurred boundaries between them, but essentially mission-related investments are more on the profit-motivated side. And so as we've looked in terms of MRIs, we are open to them. We are very program-focused in how we want to use our PRIs. And so the board decision is really that we want to use them very focused on, we have very specific program strategies. And our program strategies are in the areas of, our key one is conservation. About half of our grant making and our PRIs are in the conservation arena. We have a population and reproductive health internationally program. That's probably the second most common of our PRIs. And including micro-enterprise, we've done a number of micro-enterprise within that. We have a 5-county local grant making, which includes the arts and food banks and shelters. That's been a common way we've used PRIs. And then finally, we have a children's families and communities. We've done some on early childhood education. So of the areas you all mentioned, we haven't done as much in health, except for we've done reproductive health, both in this country and internationally. In education, we've done early childhood, childcare and early childhood we've done. And community development is something that we were involved in previous years, but we are not at the moment involved in. So in terms of how we look at PRIs, program is absolutely first. So if an opportunity comes in, it doesn't come to me, it comes to one of our program officers. And as an example, Lisa's here today. She's our fisheries program officer. Our program officers generate all of our deals and look at the programmatic fit as the first and foremost. Then it's brought to me, if Lisa likes it, wants to sponsor it, she'll bring it to me. So I'm looking more at the PRI fit, so more of the financial, what could we structure it, would it make sense as a PRI? We also look at what we call the but-for, which is, is our capital really going to make a difference? Is this something that's going to be funded anyway, or is our capital really going to make a difference? And so to the question of MRIs, we at the moment have flexibility to do both PRIs and MRIs. To date, what we found has been that either something that comes in that has a very strong programmatic fit can be structured just as well and actually better as a PRI. So we've just done it as a PRI, and in some cases an equity PRI. Whereas a lot of the MRIs that have come our way haven't had that strong alignment with our strategies and with that but-for of our capital making a difference. So we haven't done an MRI at this stage, but we are open to them. So I guess maybe a quick picture of the types of deals that we've done. About 40% of our PRIs are land conservation deals. So land conservation is definitely a lead focus for the Packard Foundation. And I guess what I would say about that is we've done, lots saved, 1.75 million acres, and a lot to be proud of. But I think what we're even more proud of is that what we've done over the last 10 years is to work with some partners to really build up the infrastructure for land conservation PRIs. So if you look back 10 years ago, the land deals that we were doing, there was not the infrastructure there. We helped to build, there's a Resources Law Group and Resources Legacy Fund in Sacramento, organizations that we helped to build. And they have helped to build the capacity of regional land trusts, local land trusts, so that you don't just have trust for public land and nature conservancy. You have a lot of local and regional potential borrowers out there with capacity, and a lot of sophistication in the financing tools. So won't get into that, but there's a lot there in terms of easements and tax credits, and there's lots of sophistication that wasn't there 10 years ago. So we just like to spread the good news that I think we have been hoping that even more funders would get involved in the conservation arena, because there really is great opportunities to have a really large impact with some fairly low risk capital. So we're always looking for partners on those. About a quarter of our PRIs are facilities. So a lot of these are in our local area. Arts, we've done a number of arts PRIs. The Community School for Music and the Arts, many of you may know locally, that was accomplished partly through one of our PRIs. The San Jose Institute for Contemporary Art was another of our PRIs. And we've also done food banks and shelters. And so we like these types of PRIs in terms of they're really enabling the organizations to get to a whole new level. So if you look at the history of the Community Center for Music and the Arts, I mean, it was just a little, sort of, it didn't have a home, and it was a mostly volunteer, just smaller organization, and that large facility has really put them on the map. And similarly for the food bank, actually, really Elliot McRae just came in front of our board in September and, practically brought people to tears, just, showed the little, spot of pots where they used to be housed and now where they are, and how they've really increased the number of hungry people that they've been able to serve. And so it just, those PRIs have been a real focus for us.
Can you give us an example of how you structure that? Are you acting like a bank so that they're borrowing money from you to build these buildings?
So yes, they are borrowing money from us to build these buildings. I guess one thing that we've had we had some early PRIs to, I can think of a shelter and a food bank that were more like a mortgage almost. They were longer term. We are somewhat open to that now, although I think the longer term PRIs are hard for us to do, partly for staffing and to get these monthly payments over 5 years. And so we've tended to go more towards medium term loans where we could bridge a capital campaign. So if they've either got, the thing we like the most is if they've got that, we have one right now where they say, oh, we have signed pledges and just they're going to pay over a number of years. Well, that's very easy.
And how do you determine the interest rate?
We have a flat interest rate. So some foundations do risk adjusted. We don't. We are a flat interest rate. We've been 2%. We're just reducing it for 2011 to 1.5%. And it's a good deal. And our philosophy really is that we are really about preserving our capital and so we are very firm with our capital preservation. So in this economic climate, we've had borrowers with difficulties, but we really work hard. And so we've had very few losses over our program. On the flip side, we are really not about making a return or profit off the portfolio. So, and we've looked at some foundations who, if they're low interest, but, and I've worked with some foundations that try to make low interest PRIs, but have, it depend on the borrower, and people tend to know what other borrowers have gotten. So it often will kind of go to a lease. So with MRIs, I think there are some foundations that do MRIs, and there a risk-adjusted return makes more sense. But for the kind of PRIs that we're doing that are really low interest and are about preservation of capital, having a fixed interest rate.
Are you the only lender in most of these buildings?
Are we the only lender? No, in most of them. Probably in, I'm trying to think of it. We are in some, probably not.
Why would they go to any other lender?
Well, we won't do. So basically the way we'll assess it is, so program will come to us, we love this grantee, we want to do whatever we can for them. Susan, take a look. And then we'll basically look at, okay, how much do you have in pledge? First of all, the building, have you got it identified? Have you got a price negotiated? How far along are you? And then look at your sources of repayment. Do you have pledges? We have one right now that I love that wants to just borrow against 100% pledges. Well, that's easy, but most of them aren't in that case, unfortunately. So, how much do you have? What percentage do you have in pledges? What percentage do you have that? Okay, we've gone to 10 donors. We'll get at least 2. So you look at the varying stages of how certain they are, and then we come up with what the amount would be. So we're not always lending the full amount. So the ones that we're lending the full amount, well, we're not lending usually the full amount of the facility, but let's say they've raised 50% of it and we come in with a loan for 50%. If they've got, I think we would be comfortable with that if they've got a lot of it sort of nailed down. In cases where a lot of it's more uncertain, I think we're more likely to just agree a smaller. So it's sort of basically you have the risk, the amount, the number of years, and we're playing with all of those variables together to strike the right balance. Yeah.
Have you used PRI to provide cash collateral for facilities for other lenders that are asking for some
To basically their equity requirement,
their equity or the collateral requirement, some sort of
like a guarantee. So we have done guarantees. We've done guarantees for bond issues and for bank loans in the more distant past. It's not so. Some of the accounting treatment of those guarantees has changed, and our CFO is an expert on that, and I'm not. But I think that is one factor, as well as I think there was a feeling a while back that it was just sort of a costless transaction. We had a big balance sheet. We should be able to pledge some of that, but it is not as costless as I think we thought it was going to be. And so I think our appetite for doing guarantees is diminished because of that. It's not to say we would never do one, but it's not something we're pushing at the moment. And part of what we find is when we have done guarantees, often the ones that are penciling out are the ones that they could get a bank loan anyway. And the bank has basically come and said, well, if you could put up a pledge or a guarantee, we'll reduce your interest rate by 1.5%, 2%. And we sort of look at the economics of that and say, well, we're going to tie up, especially the way our foundation has moved it down now, we're going to tie up this capital and the opportunity cost to get 1% on what's the amount of the loan. Is that really, we just sort of do a cost benefit, have also figured that in some cases it'd almost be better to give them a grant for the difference in interest rate as opposed to tying up that much of our balance sheet.
Question?
Sure.
Do you have size thing? Oh, did I override something?
I thought you had a couple more back here as well.
Let's do this.
I had a quick question. Do you typically take security, get a deed of trust or second or something?
We on our real estate loans, we do typically take security, and we actually have. I came on board in 2008. So one interesting sideline of the story is, and to give comfort to those of you in the room who are smaller and less staffed, Packard Foundation has been doing PRI since 1980, and I was hired in 2008. So do the math, 28 years of making a lot of PRIs with very similarly staffed. But once I came, we've tried to be sort of come up more with what is our policy around security, because I think sometimes we would spend a lot of effort on security that didn't really maybe help us. So we've come up with some guidelines, but basically mostly in a real estate transaction to show seriousness, we do. And then absolutely in a real estate transaction where there are other lenders at the table, no question. We do security, and we've had a lot of bumping up against other lenders on that because you're a foundation. Why, and we really negotiated hard on that to really make the case that we're a lender and we do expect full repayment and we don't want to be treated like equity.
I have a quick question. It's kind of a two-part. Do you have a preference towards direct lending or funding like through an intermediary, the CDFI?
Yes.
And do you underwrite your own loans?
So on this first question, I was going to mention that because we do have a strong preference towards intermediaries, definitely. I think intermediaries definitely can make job easier. So to take in the child care arena is a good example for us because we did a number of individual child care centers. And I won't name their names, but they had a lot of neighbors upset, and they had a heritage tree on their property, and they were calling the Packard Foundation to angry neighbors. It was just a good example of some of the difficulty of making some of these as individual. We also have, so we have the whole range, because then we also tried to go to a bank and give a bank a guarantee, and just that in terms of getting the dollars out and the relationship changing has been mixed. And so then we actually it was a Packard PRI that helped the Low Income Investment Fund, large intermediary, to create the ABCD fund, an intermediary fund for child cares. And I think that we feel like that's been a huge success. And they've now rolled it out in California, they've rolled it out nationally. So to be part of building intermediaries is very much a focus of ours. And then I think your other question was about, do we do our own assessment? So we do. And so this, I started in August of 2008. So the Packard Foundation was either incredibly prescient or lucky in the sense, not because of me per se, but in terms of hiring the staff, just in the sense of, I think there was more that foundations could do when everything's going up. It's sort of like with all of our stock portfolios. You can pick any stock. They're all going up and everything's fine. And I think I am, so there's a little bit of a mixed message. I certainly feel that anyone can do it, but I also would really advise you do want to get, whether it's a consultant or someone on staff or your CFO or somebody that in this economic climate, I think there are deals that are shakier and have more things that you do need to think about. And so doing it not just in the past, it was more, program would bring a deal and then it would be run out of legal. And I think having a step between those that says program brings it and then looking at the underwriting, looking at it as a financing transaction is a step that needs to be added, especially in this climate, is my view. But you don't have to staff for it. I mean, you can. There are consultants out there. You've probably got people in your foundations or that can fill in for that role. But it is something that's important to do.
Can I just add really quickly
Yeah.
to that? I would also highlight it matters what field you're trying to do this in, because I would say for maybe children's education or facility service or land conservation deals, there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of best practices who can find consultants who know how to do this or organizations. Or other fields, maybe, like aspects of international community development in certain countries or regions, marine fisheries, there isn't. There is not that field of instruction experience. So it's just important to know who can you go to for context, who understands what risk looks like on both sides, your issue area, risk to the community and financial risk to the fisheries piece. And so that's just an important factor to keep in mind.
And that's a really good point. It sort of ties together your two questions. Because I think where there are, one of the foundations I worked at previously that didn't have staff, if you have established intermediaries, I think they can play that role for you. And so a lot of it is if you're either building the intermediary or if you're just trying to go out and do, like we funded the company that brought ROU 486 to this country. That's just an individual venture. You're going against a private sector company to negotiate, and you just, so there's a spectrum. So some deals don't require it the same way. I think this one is really.
Very.
Is there, any size limits or complexity limits on what you do? Specifically, would you be involved in supporting facilities for a new charter school?
So we don't have a size limit per se, and it's part of this balance of the number of years, the risk, the amount, sort of together. So for example, we did a $30 million PRI, but it was a bridge loan that was considered low risk plus public land. So there's the size is very much gauged to that. So we don't have a maximum. I guess your question about the charter schools also gets into the question we were just talking about is it an individual charter school or is it an intermediary of charter schools? We would look at those very differently. So I know we are talking about a group that's intermediary with early childhood education. I think we would have more appetite for larger loan in that case than if we were dealing with an individual school. So, I guess the only last thing, because I want to make sure there's time for Caryn. I guess, two quick points I would make. One is about, as you think about going in and PRIs, I think one is to think about your own philosophy on risk. So that's one thing I think is a good starting point. For us, I would say we have been very strongly that it's programmatic first, and I would say we're about medium risk. Our board has enabled up to a third of our PRI. We're about at a third of our outstanding portfolio that we as staff classify as high risk. We've had a few losses, but as a percent, it's small. We work hard not to have losses in our portfolio. So, yes.
Could you be a little bit more specific? What is
high risk? What's that?
Could you Be a little bit more specific.
How many losses?
Yeah.
So we've had 6 losses, which if you take as a percentage of, we've done close to 200 deals, it's 3% of our deals.
And
But the amount is even smaller. So the amount is even smaller because usually what was happening in those is we do work hard and we worked hard and got most of it back, and then at some point, you know, we do have a programmatic focus, so we're not squeezing every last bit out. So at some point it became clear this, you know, so there was a portion of it was written off in the end in those 6 deals, not the whole amount.
The loss, it becomes a grant.
We don't convert to grants. And that is very, so one of the things to think about is so we have, in our messaging out, is this is a loan. We work really hard with borrowers to make sure they're not overextending. We have a lot of these right now that, you know, with a nonprofit that just sees big dollar signs and, you know, oh, we could do I have one right now who said, oh, not only this facility, but I just want to build a ground-up facility to rent out to others and get into the commercial renting business. And so we've really had to work to sort of work to make sure borrowers aren't overextending. So we do a lot of that on the front end, but then once, you know, we are very much, our messaging out is this is a loan. Think hard about whether your organization is in your interest to take on a loan, but this is a loan, and we do expect full repayment of it. And so I think for some foundations that have a combination of some that are converted to grant, there's a little bit, I can name 1 or 2 that have had problems with this, because there's a little bit of a mixed message that goes out, and I know in some cases, some that have not paid where maybe they even could pay, but there's been mixed messaging. The only other thing I was going to mention was the PRI Makers Network, and both Caryn and I are involved in that. And just that's a really great resource. We've been involved, we were just saying, I guess 2003 is what you were saying with the first early conversations. But it's really sort of been organizationally around for maybe 4 or 5 years. And both of our foundations have been involved since the beginning. It's grown to be a great network, both in terms of the documents and templates on the web, the conferences and webinars, but also as a network of people sharing experiences. So I just put that as a great resource.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks to Susan and Jason. I'm Caryn Sachs, and I run a terribly modest family foundation out of a home office in Sonoma. And I'm a recovering attorney. So I'm just going to throw these around just for the heck of it, and you can all share them. I didn't bring enough clearly. In any case, I took over our foundation in 2000, and it was established in 1997 by my father. I'm going to stand up here because I don't stand in. And I took over in 2000, and we come at this from a really, really different angle. Perhaps exclusive to ourselves. We came in 97 when we established the Family Foundation with the understanding and the mandate that we would be giving almost exclusively 100% of our giving annually in PRIs. So there was no debate, there was no discussion, there was no sort of this department and that department. First of all, we're only an $18 million family foundation. So I wear a lot of the different hats in our foundation. But I did know from the very beginning I was going to have to go out and find programs and organizations and people and connections to those organizations that would work with PRIs, that knew about them or wanted to know about them and could use them. So in the decade I've been running the foundation, we currently have, and that number grows every year, and I'm happy to share with you our secret little piece of paper here, which outlines our current 18 PRIs that are in existence right now. And they range in size from $150,000 to $250,000. And the terms are usually for 3 to 5 years. We started pretty short term, 3 years, and we've been going out to 5 and 6 years as my comfort level has grown. And I'm now better poised 10 years down the road to juggle the PRIs slightly better. And our interest rates do vary, unlike Susan's. But in order to qualify, they must be below market. That's the obvious. They must. There may be one exception to that rule that I can talk about. But so ours range. Some of our older PRIs in the go-go years were at 4%, but our average is really down to about 2% right now. So 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. Our highest one is at 4%. We have been, for the last 2 years, renegotiating our interest rates down. Obviously, because the organizations we're working with are hitting hard times. And our goal is to leverage the little money that we have in the Family Foundation. And again, it's not the profit motive. So if an organization comes to us and says, look, could you extend us out from 3 to 5 years? Could you lower it from 3% to 2.5? Of course. I mean, our purpose is philanthropy. It's charity, it's not profit. So we're flexible in that regard. We work in several of the fields that you all were mentioning. We work in. Some lend themselves a little bit better or more easily to the PRIs we do than others. We do a lot of low-income housing. We do job training, affordable daycare programs. We do micro-business loans. We've worked in a little bit of land conservation. We've worked a wee bit in the arts, but not so much. We really just want to work in some core areas. We also work with LIF, Nancy Andrews. And there was a question earlier as to working directly or with intermediaries. We have to work through intermediaries. I can't do it all. I mean, I'm juggling 18 different PRIs in any given year. And so my comfort level is really to work with the organizations that are established, that understand the needs in their communities. And that might be an organization in Seattle, a couple in Portland, a couple in LA. We're all over the United States where we can find an organization that has an idea or a project or program that fits with sort of our mandate. So I can name off a few. There are a lot out there, and I was very worried when I started in 2000 and shifted away from being a corporate attorney and taking over our family foundation from scratch. I was like, where am I going to find organizations that understand about PRIs and want to work with them? And the first person I went to was Mary Rogier of the Northern California Community Loan Fund right on Market Street. And she very kindly gave me a list of about 10 other organizations that I could go to and work with and sort of get myself jump-started and educated. And they really kind of walked me through for the first few years on doing loans. More specifically, our loans are almost all unsecured. We have had no defaults to date. We've been doing it for 13 years. We've probably had 45 PRIs in total over those 13 years, and we've had no defaults. So that's a pretty good track record. We're doing better than our financial advisors in New York City. What we like to do is if we work with an organization and they've repaid or paid their interest payments on time, and they've repaid the loan in full at term, at due date, we normally will renew with them. When we renew, we usually give them an operating grant. So we don't like to say, oh, if you default, it becomes a grant. First of all, a grant of $250 on an organization that's only $18 million is a huge hit. So sort of along the lines of what Susan was saying, we're not going to really treat these as grants. We're not even going to talk about that. What we're going to say is it's a loan. We expect for you to pay semi-annually, quarterly, once a year, whatever the terms might be that we've agreed with them on. But at the end of that, if we like what you're doing and you want to renew, we'll renew with you and we'll give you an operating grant. Mm-hmm.
What are the repercussions for an organization that doesn't repay? How is it different than if you were a bank?
I won't work with them again.
But are there any legal, credit, legal, what are the repercussions?
Yes, we could, of course. I mean, our loan documents actually come from the Ford Foundation. And so culled down, I mean, we went from documents that were 90 pages to 28. I went through them myself to make them manageable. And we have recourse, but because we are 95% of our loans are unsecured, we're really in the good graces of making sure that I've done my homework and kicked the tires on the particular project, looked at the financials, gone through it with the board, really make the site visits, make sure if they're in trouble that we understand where their troubles are. We had an organization up in Seattle that was going through some issues, and I felt very uncomfortable renewing with them, and I didn't. I took 2 years out while they sort of figured out what they were doing, and then we went back and renewed just recently a new PRI with them. But that's the way we're operating, and I'm not saying it's the smartest way, but it's effective for us. So unsecured loans, a few secured loans, those are usually in the housing industry. We also have some certificates of deposit. So we do work with, for example, we have a CD with Santa Cruz Community Credit Union.
Well, I was just going to say, for the group to think about, one of the things in Caryn's situation, where your primary focus is PRIs and not grants, you're in a different relationship. I know for us, our primary relationship is usually through grants and the PRIs, and so there's a built-in incentive for them to not default in a lot of these cases. So that's just something else to add to the mix.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really have a cudgel. I mean, if I wanted to, I could secure more of our loans. What would I secure them against? Lots of low-income housing, some food in food kitchens, some daycare toys in the daycare. I mean, really.
And are you going to go after that stuff?
And am I going to go after it and put it all in my house in Sonoma? I mean, honestly, So I'm very happy with the group we've been working with, and a lot of the organizations are now on their third PRIs with us. I've established a comfort level, these past 10, 11 years with a lot of these groups. And again, I have been asked to go in on direct loans and direct investment opportunities, one in particular in Brazil, and I flew all the way to Brazil in 2005 to look at this project, and I was like, I don't, not when you're one person running an organization of ours. For me to get involved directly, I trust in the expertise of the organizations on that sheet and the ones listed in the back of our brochure. And so far, I think we've been pretty lucky. And so my job really is to find new investment opportunities, new loan opportunities. I love the idea of collaborating with other foundations, big, small, medium, always looking for new opportunities, because with every year, we have a growing number of PRIs. We have our PRI assets, which are continually in the PRI constellation, and I have to renew them. And then we have our non-PRI assets, but I have to throw off 5% of that every year. So my goal is to try to keep it all sort of juggling. We've talked about collaborating with some other groups, and I think maybe this next year there's going to be a couple of opportunities moving forward, because 250 may not be a lot for a particular project, but 250 times 5 groups. So yeah.
I think you talk a little bit about maintenance. How much does it take of your time after you grant, after you do a PRI, to effectively manage that throughout the 3 or 5 or 6 years?
Well, effective versus ineffective. We increased the board from 3 to 5 members. I've co-opted both my brother and sister. It is a family organization. They both live in New York City, and I'm tasking them with looking at and managing all of the East Coast PRIs. So they will be sent to Boston Community Capital. They will be sent to the Ozarks, where we're working with a very small group called Forge Inc. And they're doing, Forge is doing sustainable farming in the Ozarks. And there's a Florida Community Loan Fund out of Orlando. And so as we get more and more PRIs, I actually do need to ramp up on staffing within the family. And I've just cut us off at the Ozarks, and they'll take over the 4 or 5 PRIs on the East Coast and the Midwest.
And I guess for us, I mean, at the moment, we do have myself. So we have one step. We have our 50 PRIs. It's basically me. But that was, compared to where it used to be, which may be more relevant to some of you, there was not a dedicated staff. So it was more portions of people's time. And then we have outsourced. So we do and have for a long time outsourced the monitoring function for our PRIs. So, and there are consultants out there that will do that, and we found that to be actually fairly cost effective way to make sure that we're keeping on top of our PRI portfolio.
And that may be the way I have to go. We're getting to a critical number here where I think beyond 20 or 22, I may need to outsource the monitoring.
You may start to strain your family relations.
Yes, yes, exactly. And really look at the financials for these organizations. Really plug into the financials and go to the sites, put the hard hat on and see what's really happening. So, at 18, you're getting on airplanes a lot.
And it's also in this climate. So we're finding that the needs, because we are having a larger percentage of our portfolio that are coming back with requests to extend, to, in our case, not to reduce the interest rate because it can't go that far, but it's mainly to extend the terms. And so there's a lot of back and forth. To have some support on that in this climate, I think, is even more important than it was maybe 5 years ago.
What does monitoring mean to you? Does that mean, if they're making their payments as they are supposed to, are you actively monitoring, or is it only when there's a problem? Or
Well, in many instances, these organizations have a particular program and or a project, and I want to go see the project. I want to make sure the building, the Plymouth Housing Group says it's converting into single resident occupancy is actually happening. So that's really physically looking at the particular project. We have one in Santa Cruz with Art Space, and they took an old tannery site just outside of downtown Santa Cruz, an old turn-of-the-century tanning building, and they converted it into live work loft art space studio. And I was like, I gotta go see and make sure that this tannery really, that's the real monitoring. But also, it's not just the site monitoring, it's also looking at the financials and being able to red flag problems.
Yeah, so looking at the financials, the site visits, I think reviewing the reports. One thing that we've done since I got to the foundation is to add, we actually now in our credit agreements for new PRIs actually put in reporting metrics. Because one problem we were having is we were getting reports and they'd say, we made 50 loans, or and it's like, I don't know, is that, I have no benchmark to measure. Is that, so we now, with our new PRIs, we do, and it does take some time when we do the PRIs, but it makes it over the life easier. So we agree with the borrower what their projections are and their milestones and what they think they're going to achieve with the PRI, so that we can have an easier way to go back and compare if they're on track.
Is that financial or is it social outcomes as well?
Mainly social. The financial is basically, are they repaying? That's the.
Well,
so
in terms of dollars leveraged and things like that.
Oh, that's financial. So yeah, so that would kind of thing would be. So it would be both the direct social outcomes, dollars leveraged. And in some cases it's some milestones about the repayment, like if we're bridging to a capital campaign. Where are you with your fundraising? So it's sort of a combination of programmatic and financial milestones.
So it sounds like you can rely on the intermediaries to bring you opportunities, but you don't rely on them to do the ongoing monitoring.
No, I rely on them as well to do yeah, absolutely. It's just simply, if I bring a project to the board, part of my duties is to actually make sure that the program or the project is in fact what it's stated to be. So in that regard, that's really kind of one of the hats I have to wear. But I would expect for each one of our organizations, they have to. They have reports to send out, and I have requirements that they give me quarterly financials or whatever. So if I sense that there's a problem going on, I'm hoping that they'll come to me, and thus far they have come to me and said, we've got a problem, and we've discussed it.
So one distinction in your question, so if we have a, like the Community Center for Music and the Arts, just if we have a facility PRI loan, then we're very much in the situation that Caryn described. We're going to go see it, we're direct, that individual facility is our borrower. If we're working through an intermediary, so let's take the LIF ABCD fund, a little bit in the language is, so if we work to make a loan to that intermediary, they're not bringing deals to us. We basically make them a loan, say here's, in our case, it was big.
So they do the monitoring.
Well, it's their loans. So in other words, we say, here's $5 million, $12 million, $1 million, whatever. You can have that for this many years, and you can re-lend it to as many borrowers as you can, and those are your loans. They're not our loans. So they're monitoring their loans. We're just monitoring that intermediary. How many loans have you gotten out? How many losses have you had? You know, how many child care centers have been built? You know, we're monitoring that intermediary, and then the intermediary is monitoring all the individuals. That's sort of, if you're thinly staffed, the beauty of an intermediary, if you will, is that they're not all those little individual loans aren't your loans anymore.
I wouldn't be able to monitor one organization with the projects they've got going on, let alone 18, unless I have some faith that the intermediary is, you know, managing their own loan portfolio. So.
And to take that in the very extreme, because there was some questions about international. So we have had a number of experiences, and you made about going to, hopping on planes. So we, and I'm right now negotiating 2 very difficult individual transactions in Africa, and it is a big portion of my time right now. So I guess what our experience has been, not that it's not worth doing necessarily, but you need, if you're going to go into a direct real estate transaction in Africa, or that's going to take a lot of time. I think the ones that have been a lot more realistic for some in this room, we had, for example, PRI to Marie Stopes International, and they made clinic loans in 15 countries around the globe, and 78 clinics, and it's a great success story. But it was their loans. Our relationship was just with Marie Stopes. So I think if you're thinly staffed and if you're smaller, having, even in the international context, those intermediary relationships can really be helpful.
And to mirror that, we've worked for 13 years now with Axion International and Axion USA, but Axion International does micro business lending primarily in Central and South America. So Axion, micro lending, Central South America, but I don't get on the airplane and go to see which cooperative in Guatemala is doing what. That's for Axion people to do.
Can I follow up on Axion? Sorry. 2 things. We've been doing microlending for Unitas and some other groups. And one of the problems we have is we just give them money and hope for the best. And hope that the loans are actually having an impact. And it's really hard to get impact from microloans if there's a family, actually 10 families getting out of poverty. What's that mean? All that. So what is your relationship with Axion? What is it you looked for when you decided to go with them, other than them being big and all over the place?
They're pretty well established. There are a few large organizations. This all came out of Grameen Bank, but they're one of the few that we sort of trusted to do the micro lending in a reasonable fashion. Now, having said that, have I gotten on an airplane and gone to Guatemala or Honduras, wherever they're operating, to actually physically look? No, I haven't. And that's sort of where I'm stretched pretty thinly. And it might be worth it for one of us on the board to go down there and actually kick the tires on the projects that they have in their annual report.
So you're really kind of going, you want to have some sort of participation in that space, and then you find an organization that has the best reputation, and then you just go with that.
So, and I think we're similar. Well, reputation, you look at their track records. Usually they will have statistics that they can give you on their accomplishments. But one thing I was going to add to that discussion is one thing that we're looking at, and specifically with microenterprise, we have a few. We have a BRAC, Africa Partners for Development. We've had others. Is we are looking at, some of you may be familiar with a group called the GIN. Anybody familiar with the GIN? So the GIN is it's like a PRI makers network in a sense, but for this larger impact investing field. So it's Global Impact Investing Network. And it's got a membership, we're just joining the Investors Council of this group. And so it's basically institutions, be they foundations, but largely institutional investors who are making socially motivated impact investments. And so one of the things that they are doing is coming up with trying to come up with standards, outcome measurement standards. It's called IRIS. I don't remember what that stands for. Something impact. Anyway, IRIS. And so one thing, we've been in discussions with them. We did just join the Investors Council. And we're doing a pilot, and to be honest, in this room, we're not sure if this is going to be useful or how we feel about it yet, but we would like to go in and just do a sort of toe in the water and try it out. And so we actually are just now making a grant to work with them, and we're going to take the few, at the moment I think we have 4 or 5, depends if we count one that just closed, of micro enterprise PRIs, because those are ones where there's a lot of interrelated metrics, and so we're going to subject it to the IRIS measurement system and see if that's helpful in terms of exactly your question of have our PRIs, what has been the impact of these PRIs programmatically, and can we put any kind of quantifiable
What would you
measure?
look for if you're on the field? I'm going to Peru for January and February. Part of my trip there is to teach English, but the other part is to nose around and do something besides being Silicon Valley, but actually figure out what organizations are actually doing real stuff and what the real thing is. So what would you look for down there?
Well, and one thing you should certainly, I mean, so I don't know if you've been reading the articles out of India and Andhra Pradesh about the revolt against micro-lending. And so there's just, I think, in this economic climate and given our financial collapse, I think it is a more complicated question in terms of the positive impact on the borrowers. So I would certainly have a lens that includes those issues about, is it, it's the same issue about, was it right to get those people into those homes? Is that, and then obviously the traditional measures of jobs and sustainability.
So speaking on behalf of SV2, I'm also on the board of SV2. And if we were to think about PRIs for our portfolio, okay, we're very small. This would be hundreds of thousands of dollars, so nothing significant, but possibly up to $1 million or something. So very small. But then the other question is, they're probably not intermediaries that are focused on just very local, Silicon Valley, this area, in just the education space. So can you give us some thoughts, some context about what kind of questions we should be asking with regard to, do we provide loans to our existing grantees? Do we look for or help create an intermediary? Are there lots of intermediaries in this space? Or how would you advise us to think about moving in this direction?
First thing I would say is you've got to have a community foundation. Every county has a community foundation. We have not worked with Sonoma County Community Foundation, but
we were spun out of a community foundation, Silicon Valley Community. So yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So that would be one first sort of local place to look at and discuss with them the needs in the educational sphere. But beyond that,
so I guess I would say in terms of very locally, when you talk about regional intermediaries, of which there are a lot, in terms of just local, I mean, the Opportunity Fund comes to mind, if you haven't talked to them already. And so I could see the two prongs of your strategy that would make good strategic sense for knowing nothing and just responding more generally to your question is, I think local intermediaries, I mean, something like the Opportunity Fund, not necessarily them, but something like them who a smaller dollar amount is going to be more meaningful to them, most likely, than like it will be to LIFT that's national and is trying to pull multi-million-dollar, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. And so in the order that you're talking about, those kind of, and so creating an intermediary I've done, and it's not easy. So if you can not do that, or if you can expand a group like that that's already existing, I think, and create a pool within an intermediary, will certainly be a lot more painless way to go about that. And then, but you mentioned as well, the other is your grantee. So that is the one case where we do make individuals, sometimes maybe not as small, but smaller for us, direct PRI loans when we do have a very strong, long-standing grantee relationship. And so it gets back to that, there's an incentive there, a relationship there that you're going into it. So you're not just their banker. You are their grantor. So when you go in to say we can also talk about a loan, there's an incentive that they want to do well by you.
Doesn't that necessitate staff, particularly staff who really understands this area?
So it depends on what you're doing. So for example, the ones that would come to mind, like facilities loans, is what we've done with a lot of our long-standing grantees. And I think, one thing you can do if you have no staff, I think in previous climates we relied a bit more on the organization coming in and knowing what they can take on and what they can't. Sometimes in this environment it is more difficult for nonprofits not to get overextended, but there's groups like the Nonprofit Finance Fund that can do those kind of assessments with organizations. And so one thing you could do is say, we'll make you a grant to do an assessment on whether your organization is really ready to take this on, and that could lead into a potential PRI if it looks like you're ready.
Fabulous. Thank you.
and I will tell you, Northern California Community Loan Fund, which I mentioned earlier, does a lot of assessment as well.
Okay.
Yeah, these
just to-
CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, which work a lot with new market tax credits, do a lot of the deal structuring and investigation into the grantee, and then really the approval, and you're coming in with some part of that, but it's good to work with the CDFIs as well.
I was just going to say, I'm from the California Endowment. We're in a similar position where we're health focused, and we have 14 communities in California that we're specifically targeting right now. And we've talked with LIFT and Northern California Community Loan Fund, and they've actually been open to dollars that we invest with them to target certain areas with a health focus. So it's an easy conversation to have, and if the CDFI or someone doesn't have the resources, they'll tell you right away. It's not something we can do for you, but if they have them, they're very open.
And in health, like NCD Capital Impact, obviously
Right.
very strong, solid intermediary, has experience. I mean, to the extent that you can find one that has experience and you don't have to build it out, you know.
Right.
There are organizations that are sort of oriented towards social benefit that are being organized as for-profit companies. And I wonder if you have any experience investing in those and how you've structured that.
We do.
Well, part of the conversation I was going to follow up with was the different ways in which you can loan and or invest. And as a family foundation, we can invest in a for-profit company as long as the investment is targeted for a charitable nonprofit purpose. Mm-hmm. We do not, to date, have any equity investments, but I'm always open to it.
Yeah, and we do have one equity, and we have a number with for-profits. And I actually am a believer that, you know, I think that there's sort of this evolving field out there with the L3Cs, and that, you know, that nonprofits can't make PRIs to for-profits, and it's just not true. So you can make, and we have made a number to for-profits. There is an additional level to be, you know, to cover your bases in terms of the charitability test. And so what we will sometimes do, if it's a for-profit that is intervening in a market where we think it's sort of on the border of charitability, we might get like an external legal opinion, and we have models for that. And just, you know, if it fits with your program areas, and there's things that they can look at to say, and if we have an opinion. So we will sometimes get an opinion to document the charitability of it. But it's certainly, and then there's expenditure responsibility requirements on them. And so there are some legal things that you need to do and should be aware of, but they're not huge. They're just, to me, it's not a barrier. It's just make sure you do them.
So one of the other questions I had was on collaboration. Caryn, you had touched on that a little bit. Can you speak to it? Have you collaborated, either of you? Do you have some examples?
Well, you know, I mean, it's a very, very small family foundation. We've sort of been marching to our own tune for the last 13 years. And it's just more recently, since I became a member of PRI Makers Network, that I've been able to sort of branch out to other family foundations and also to meet other organizations in general that want to work with PRIs. And so I'm sort of putting out my feelers right now with some meetings and upcoming events to meeting and talking with other groups that would like to collaborate. But having said that, it has to be in an area to which our missions converge.
Yeah.
So they may want to collaborate in the arts, and I'll be like, sorry, we're not doing arts. Or medical research, sorry, we're not doing medical
Well, we
research.
define it a little bit differently than you do.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the dollars may very well be there, but then does it mesh with their program or their mission? Does it mesh with ours? But I'm always happy. I mean, and our terms are not going to vary too much from what they have been, which is the 150 to 250, the 3 to 5 years, and the 2 to 3.5%. That's just our comfort level for now. But if I find another organization that wants to come in for $1 million, I'm like, hey, all right, we'll piggyback off of you.
And so we have collaborated. It's always an interesting question for me to answer because I spent about 15 years of my career creating collaborative lending and investment structures and getting investors to invest in them. So, I mean, on that sense, I like collaborative vehicles, and I think they've got a purpose and they can break new ground and are great. Now that I'm on the investor side, I have a slightly different view of it in the sense of I think in terms of general, PRI Makers Network in general, non-deal specific collaboration, absolutely, we love it. But in terms of deals, collaborative loan funds that have been brought to us and they're not exactly within our program, and then you have a lot of complications. I'm actually on one that we're trying to restructure, and we've got different investors that have very different, some are quasi-government, some are, foundations, and it's just gotten complicated. And so I think where we stand at the moment is we certainly don't have a preference for them as a collaborative vehicle. If one happens to come along that fits, we don't have it that we won't do it, but it's not the leverage is obviously somewhat of an asset, but we just definitely have a very clear-eyed view of the difficulties of being involved in these collaborative ventures. So, for example, when we've had initiatives that we wanted to launch something new, for example, when there was a state budget crisis and our board said we really want to get in front of that and we want to see what we can do, we had a lot of discussion about should we create a loan fund, a collaborative vehicle, and try to invite other foundations and get our president to invite, and go that whole collaborative route. And I think where we came out is, let's go do what we want to do and then invite others, but we're not going to get into the structuring around everybody's needs. We're more, this is what we're going to do, and if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. But, getting into that whole difficult negotiation on the investor side is not something we have a strong appetite for.
I just had one last one on, Caryn, maybe you could speak to your smaller investments. What do they look like? 100,000, 150,000?
Yeah, we have one odd one out there floating around for 50,000, but it's with the Lamplighters, Opera West. They do Gilbert and Sullivan in the city, and an ongoing one. But it's not tough. That's in perpetuity. That one may actually become a grant. Just the 50,000 grant. I'm not taking interest in their costumes. So other than that, our smallest one right now is with Forge in Arkansas. That's 150, and our largest one has just gone from 250 to 300,000 as of 3 days ago with Shorebank Cascadia, and they've got a variety of offices up in the Northwest: Astoria, Portland, Seattle. That's our zone. And we're too small to make $1 million loans. We're not too small. I'll just be out of a job within about a day or two, if we were to do sort of the amounts that are being done. Plus, we have a little bit of a method to our madness in terms of risk. And so I'm really trying to spread the risk around. It's not all concentrated in housing. It's not all concentrated in one region. The terms vary a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, just so I'm spreading out risk so that I don't have a day where 3 or 4 of our PRIs amounting to 1.5 million aren't repaid. And you can sort of see that from our very crude chart there.
Is it your purpose to keep your endowment in perpetuity, or will you allow it
That
to
will
waste?
be at the next board discussion. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Family foundations are odd because they really are driven by the personalities in the family. So it would be an issue to discuss with my brother and sister to see what their interest level is if I taper off or run off to the Bahamas with some amount of that foundation. No. So that we can spend the money down in 1 second. Not a problem. I could go out tomorrow and put out the balance of the 15 or 16 million in PRIs and grants, and we'd be done. But I think the goal is to try to keep this going and to keep it running and to keep it leveraged and to keep those relationships going. 10, 20, 30, 40 years. We'll see. The other question, and the one that's more interesting, is what are we doing with our non-PRI assets? And are we going to put more money into the non-PRI assets? And how are they being managed or mismanaged, as it were? So these are all topics for our next board meeting in January in New York City.